Jasmine Carter never expected her new job as a caregiver would lead her to Damien Wexler, a bitter architect trapped by his wheelchair and past. But when her courage cracks his walls, sparks fly, and so do the threats from their pasts. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Jasmine Carter stared at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror of her small apartment. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of another sleepless night worrying about bills. At 30 years old, she hadn't imagined life would be this hard. But being a single mom meant every day was a battle to keep going. "Mommy, I can't find my blue truck," called out 8-year-old Malik from the living room. "Check under your bed, baby," Jasmine replied, quickly applying some mascara. She couldn't be late for this job interview, not when the rent was due in 3 days and her savings account was practically empty. The letter from her former employer still sat on the kitchen counter, the words "position eliminated" jumping off the page like a slap in the face. 2 years as a receptionist at Morgan & Lewis law firm, gone in an instant because of company restructuring. Malik appeared in the doorway, truck in hand, wearing his favorite Spider-Man t-shirt. "Found it. Ms. Rodriguez says I can bring it for show and tell today." Jasmine smiled, grateful that their elderly neighbor had agreed to watch Malik before and after school while she looked for work. "That's great, honey. Now grab your backpack. We need to get moving." The bus ride across town took them from their modest neighborhood to the wealthy part of the city, where houses looked more like palaces. Jasmine kissed Malik goodbye at Ms. Rodriguez's door and checked the address on the wrinkled newspaper clipping one more time. Private caregiver needed. Experience preferred but not required. Competitive salary, immediate start possible. The mansion at 1255 Oakwood Drive loomed before her, its iron gates and perfectly manicured lawns screaming old money. Jasmine pressed the intercom button, her hand trembling slightly. "Yes?" a gruff male voice answered. "I'm Jasmine Carter. I have an interview for the caregiver position at 9 o'clock. The gates opened with a creak, and Jasmine walked up the long driveway, her sensible shoes clicking against the pavement. The front door opened before she could knock, revealing an older woman in a housekeeper's uniform. "I'm Mrs. Jenkins," the woman said, her expression neutral. "Mr. Wexler is waiting in his study. Follow me, and whatever you do, don't let his attitude scare you off. We've gone through 5 caregivers in the last 3 months." Jasmine's stomach tightened, but she couldn't afford to be scared off. Not with Malik counting on her. The study was dimly lit, heavy curtains blocking most of the morning sun. In the center of the room, a man sat in a wheelchair, his back too. The door, he didn't turn around when they entered. "Mr. Wexler, Miss Carter is here for the interview," Mrs. Jenkins announced. "Another one?" His voice was deep and bitter. "How long do you think this one will last, Mrs. Jenkins? A week, maybe 2? Jasmine straightened her spine. "Why don't you ask me directly, Mr. Wexler? I'm standing right here." The wheelchair turned slowly. Damien Wexler was younger than Jasmine had expected, probably around 40, with sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to look right through her. His expensive sweater and tailored pants couldn't hide the fact that his legs were useless, trapped in the chair that had become his prison. "Very well, Miss Carter. Why don't you tell me why I should waste my time hiring you when you'll probably quit like all the others?" "Because I need this job, Mr. Wexler. I'm a single mother with a young son, and I'm not afraid of hard work or difficult people. I've dealt with both my entire life." He raised an eyebrow. "Difficult people? Is that what I am?" "From what Mrs. Jenkins said about going through 5 caregivers in 3 months, yes, that's exactly what you are, but that doesn't scare me." A flash of something, surprise, maybe even respect, crossed his face before the scowl returned. "The job requires discretion, punctuality, and a strong stomach. You'll need to help me with everything: bathing, dressing, physical therapy. Still interested?" "Yes. Even when I tell you the bathroom routine includes seeing me naked and handling my body." Jasmine met his challenging stare. "Mr. Wexler, I've changed diapers, cleaned vomit, and handled every bodily fluid imaginable while raising my son. The human body doesn't embarrass me." For the first time, Damien Wexler actually looked at her, really looked at her. His eyes took in her simple blouse and skirt, the worn but clean shoes, the determination in her stance. The salary is $5,000 a month, plus health insurance. You'll have your own room here at the mansion for the nights I need overnight care. Mrs. Jenkins will show you the schedule and responsibilities. Can you start tomorrow? Jasmine's heart leaped, but she kept her voice steady. Yes, I can. Fine, Mrs. Jenkins will handle the paperwork. Don't make me regret this, Miss Carter. As Mrs. Jenkins led her out to complete the employment forms, Jasmine fought back tears of relief. $5,000 a month, health insurance, it was more than she'd dared to hope for. He liked you, Mrs. Jenkins said quietly as they walked down the hallway. I haven't seen him hire anyone that quickly before. He has a funny way of showing it. Mrs. Jenkins sighed. Mr. Wexler wasn't always like this. Before the accident, he was one of the most celebrated architects in the city. Charming, brilliant, full of life. The crash changed everything, not just his body, his spirit. What happened? Drunk driver ran a red light 2 years ago. Mr. Wexler was trapped in the car for almost an hour before they could get him out. The spinal cord injury left him paralyzed from the waist down. He shut down his architecture firm, cut off most of his friends, and barely leaves the house anymore. The only reason he even agreed to hire caregivers was that his doctor insisted he needed professional help. Jasmine thought about the bitterness in those dark eyes, the anger that seemed to radiate from him. Well, he's stuck with me now. I don't give up easily. That's good, Mrs. Jenkins replied. Because underneath all that anger, there's still a good man in there. Someone just needs to help him remember that. As Jasmine signed the employment contract, she looked around at the massive house with its empty halls and heavy silence. Tomorrow, she would start the job that could change her life. If she could just get past the walls Damien Wexler had built around himself. Little did she know those walls were about to become the least of her challenges in the months ahead. Jasmine's first week at the Wexler mansion tested every ounce of patience she possessed. Damien seemed determined to prove she wouldn't last, starting with their very first morning together. You're late, he snapped when she arrived at 7:02 a.m. I expect punctuality, Miss Carter. The bus was delayed by 2 minutes, Mr. Wexler. It won't happen again. Jasmine set down her bag, refusing to be intimidated. The bathroom routine starts at 7 sharp. Every minute wasted is a minute I fall behind schedule. Jasmine followed him to the massive master bathroom, trying not to stare at the luxury surrounding them. The marble countertops alone probably cost more than her entire apartment. The water temperature needs to be exactly 95 degrees, Damien instructed. Not too hot, not too cold. I can't feel it properly, so you'll need to check it carefully. The process of helping him undress and transfer from his wheelchair to the specially designed bath chair was awkward for both of them. Jasmine could see the humiliation in his eyes, even as he tried to mask it with coldness. I'm not made of saglas, he said sharply when she hesitated to lift his legs. Just do what needs to be done. As she helped wash his back, Jasmine noticed the scattered papers on the counter. Before she could stop herself, her eyes caught glimpses of beautiful sketches, cityscapes and buildings drawn with incredible detail. Don't look at those, Damien's voice boomed through the bathroom. Your job is to help me bathe, not snoop. Through my personal things. I wasn't snooping, Jasmine replied calmly. But they're beautiful. Did you draw them? That's none of your business. Just finish your job and get out. The rest of the week followed a similar pattern. Damien barked orders, tested her limits, and seemed to go out of his way to make everything difficult. But Jasmine refused to break. Every morning, she arrived at exactly 6:55 a.m., prepared for whatever mood she might find him in. She learned his routines, memorized his preferences, and met his anger with steady calm. At home, Malik noticed the exhaustion in his mother's eyes. Are you okay, Mommy? He asked one evening as they ate dinner in their tiny kitchen. I'm fine, baby. Just getting used to my new job. Jasmine smiled, not wanting her son to worry. How about we watch your favorite cartoon before bedtime? The truth was, the job was taking its toll. Every night, her muscles ached from helping Damien with his exercises and transfers. The emotional strain of dealing with his constant criticism was even worse. But then came the moment that changed everything. It happened during the morning routine, exactly 1 week after she started. As Jasmine helped Damien wash his hair, she noticed his hands trembling slightly. "Are you okay, Mr. Wexler?" "I'm fine," he snapped, but his voice sounded strained. Suddenly his body went rigid and a spasm rippled through his shoulders. Jasmine reacted instantly, supporting his head before it could hit the back of the chair. "I need my medication," he gasped. "In the cabinet, the blue bottle." Jasmine quickly grabbed the pills, helping him take them with some water. She held him steady until the spasm passed, her hands gentle but firm on his shoulders. For several long moments they stayed, like that in silence. When Damien finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, almost vulnerable. "Thank you," he said quietly. Most people panic when that happens. I told you, Mr. Wexler, I don't scare easily." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "No, I suppose you don't." That afternoon, Mrs. Jenkins cornered Jasmine in the kitchen. "Whatever you did, keep doing it. He actually ate his entire lunch today. That hasn't happened in weeks." Jasmine just nodded, but inside she felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to crack those walls. The weekend came, and Jasmine arranged for Malik to stay with Ms. Rodriguez while she worked. But on Sunday morning, her carefully laid plans fell apart. "Ms. Rodriguez has a fever," Malik announced, hanging up the phone. "She says she can't watch me today." Jasmine's heart sank. She couldn't miss work, not when she was finally making progress with Damien. But she couldn't leave Malik alone either. Taking a deep breath, she made a decision. "Get your backpack, honey, you're coming with me." When they arrived at the mansion, Damien was waiting in his study as usual. His eyes widened at the sight of, "Malik, what is this?" he demanded. "This is my son, Malik. Our regular sitter is sick and I didn't want to call in at the last minute. He'll be quiet and won't disturb anything, I promise." Damien's jaw clenched. "This isn't a daycare center, Miss Carter. No, it's not. It's a huge house with plenty of space where my well-behaved 8-year-old can sit quietly and do his homework while I do my job. Unless you'd prefer I quit." The challenge hung in the air between them. Finally, Damien sighed. "Fine." But he stays in the kitchen with Mrs. Jenkins. But things didn't quite work out that way. As the day progressed, Malik's natural curiosity and innocence seemed to affect everyone around him, even Damien. It started when the boy wandered into the study during Damien's afternoon rest period. Instead of the expected explosion, Jasmine found them deep in conversation about Malik's toy cars. "My dad used to have a car like this," Damien was saying, holding one of the small vehicles. "A red Ferrari." "What happened to it?" Malik asked. A shadow crossed Damien's face. "I sold it. After the accident, I couldn't drive anymore." "That's sad," Malik said simply. "But you can still play with cars. Want to race?" For a moment, Jasmine held her breath, sure that Damien would snap at them both. Instead, something extraordinary happened. He smiled. It was small and rusty from disuse, but it was real. "Maybe another time, kid," he said softly. That night, as Jasmine tucked Malik into bed, she couldn't stop thinking about that smile. It was like seeing a crack in a dam, small but significant. Maybe there was hope for Damien Wexler after all. She had no way of knowing that this small breakthrough was just the beginning, or that the biggest challenges and surprises were still to come. The morning started like any other at the Wexler mansion, but everything was about to change. Jasmine was preparing Damien's bath when she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A door in the corner of his massive bathroom was slightly ajar. "Mr. Wexler, I'm just going to get fresh towels," she called out, heading toward what she assumed was a linen closet. "Wait. Don't." Damien's voice came too late. The door opened to reveal not a closet but a small room filled with art supplies. Sketches covered every wall, breathtaking buildings, city landscapes, and designs that took her breath away. On a drafting table in the center, more recent drawings lay scattered, the pages filled with both beautiful images and angry words scrawled in the margins. "Get out!" Damien's voice thundered behind her. He had wheeled himself to the doorway, his face twisted with fury. "Who gave you permission to go in there?" "I'm sorry," Jasmine said quietly, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the drawings. "These are amazing, Mr. Wexler. Why do you keep them hidden?" "Because they're none of your business." "They're nothing but reminders of a life I can't have anymore. Now get out." But Jasmine stood her ground. These aren't just reminders. They're proof that you haven't lost your talent. Your hands still work. Your mind still creates beautiful things. What? Do you know about it? He snapped. You're just a caregiver. You couldn't possibly understand. I understand that you're letting fear keep you prisoner, more than that wheelchair ever could, Jasmine interrupted. And I understand that hiding these drawings is like hiding part of yourself. Damien's hands gripped his wheelchair arm so tightly his knuckles turned white. Get out, you're fired. No, I'm not. Excuse me? You're not firing me because you know I'm right. And because deep down you're tired of being alone with all this. She gestured to the drawings. You're tired of being angry all the time. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Damien spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You have no right? Maybe not, but I'm the only one here who's telling you the truth instead of what you want to hear. Before he could respond, Mrs. Jenkins appeared in the doorway. Mr. Wexler, your brother Richard is here. The change in Damien was instant. His face closed off, the vulnerability replaced by a hard mask. Tell him I'm not available. He says it's about the foundation board meeting. He insists on seeing you. Jasmine watched as Damien's shoulders tensed. Fine, I'll be there in 5 minutes. He turned to Jasmine. We're not finished with this discussion. As Damien wheeled himself out of the bathroom, Jasmine caught Mrs. Jenkins' arm. His brother? He's never mentioned him before. The housekeeper's expression turned worried. Richard Wexler is complicated. He took over the family foundation after Damien's accident. Things haven't been the same between them since. From the study down the hall, raised voices could be heard. Jasmine tried not to listen as she cleaned the bathroom, but the words carried clearly. The board is getting impatient, Damien. Richard's voice boomed. You can't keep hiding in this house forever. Either you come back and take your place or we'll have to make permanent changes. How you mean you'll have to take permanent control? Damien shot back. Isn't that what you've wanted all along? Don't be dramatic. I'm trying to protect our family's legacy. The legacy you abandoned when you decided to become a recluse. I didn't abandon anything. I lost the use of my legs, Richard, or did you forget that tiny detail? Your legs were injured, not your brain. But instead of adapting, you locked yourself away and left me to clean up your mess. The foundation needs leadership. The architect who designed buildings for the less fortunate is now too self-absorbed to even show up at board meetings. The sound of something crashing made Jasmine jump. She hurried to the study, finding Damien's wheelchair next to an overturned side table, papers scattered everywhere. Get out, Damien was saying to his brother, his voice deadly quiet. Get out of my house. Richard straightened his expensive suit. The next board meeting is in 2 weeks. If you're not there, we'll take the vote without you. He turned to leave, nodding curtly to Jasmine as he passed. Jasmine began picking up the scattered papers. They were old newspaper articles about Damien, about the buildings he'd designed, the charitable projects he'd led, the lives he'd changed through the Wexler Foundation's work. Leave them, Damien said tiredly. Was he telling the truth about the foundation? Damien wheeled himself to the window, staring out at the gardens. The Wexler Foundation was started by my grandfather to help build community centers and affordable housing in poor neighborhoods. I took over when I was 25, added programs for education and job training. It was more than just building structures. It was about building futures. And now? Now? He laughed bitterly. Now my brother runs everything. He's more interested in fancy fundraising galas than actual community work. But what can I do? I can barely leave this house, let alone run a foundation. Jasmine thought about the sketches in the bathroom, about the passion and pain she'd seen in those drawings. Maybe you can do more than you think. Don't start, he warned. I'm not in the mood for another pep talk. Fine, but will you at least look at something? She hurried to the bathroom and returned with one of his recent sketches, a design for what looked like a community center with ramps and accessible features seamlessly integrated into the architecture. Where did you get that? He demanded. It was on your drafting table, Mr. Wexler, this design. It's not just beautiful, it's thoughtful. It shows that you understand what people with disabilities need in a building. Who better to design spaces for them than someone who knows the challenges firsthand? For a long moment, Damien stared at the sketch. It was just an idea, something to pass the time. It's more than that, and you know it. Jasmine laid the sketch on his desk. The board meeting is in 2 weeks. Maybe it's time to show them what you can still do. They wouldn't listen. Make them listen. Show them these designs. Remind them why the foundation was created in the first place. She paused. Unless you're scared. His head snapped up. I'm not scared. Prove it. Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Damien reached for the sketch. Get me my drafting supplies and call Mrs. Jenkins. I'll need coffee, lots of it. A smile tugged at Jasmine's lips. Yes, Mr. Wexler. As she headed to gather the supplies, she heard him call out, And Jasmine, you're still not fired. For the first time, he'd used her first name. It was a small thing, but somehow it felt like a victory. That night, as she helped him prepare for bed, the tension between them had shifted. Something had changed, though neither of them was ready to name it. Will you be here tomorrow? He asked as she turned off the lights. To help with the designs. Of course, someone has to keep you from giving up. In the darkness, she could have sworn she saw him smile. Good night, Jasmine. Good night, Mr. Wexler. As she left the mansion that night, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something important. The next 2 weeks would either break down the last of Damien's walls or send him retreating further behind them. What she didn't know was that forces beyond their control were already in motion, forces that would test not just Damien's courage, but her own heart as well. The next 2 weeks transformed the Wexler mansion. The study, once a dark cave of isolation, became a bustling workplace. Drawings and blueprints covered every surface as Damien threw himself into preparing for the board meeting. These accessibility features need to be more subtle, Damien muttered one evening, bent over his drafting table. We want people to feel welcome, not labeled. Jasmine watched him work, amazed by the change in him. The bitter man who had hired her was disappearing, replaced by someone focused and alive with purpose. What do you think about this layout? He asked, showing her a sketch of a community center's entrance. The ramps blend perfectly with the landscaping, she said. You'd hardly know they were there unless you needed them. He nodded, adding more details to the drawing. That's the point. Good design doesn't draw attention to accommodations. It makes them feel natural. As they worked late into the nights, their relationship began to shift. The strict boundaries between employer and employee blurred. Damien started asking for her opinion on designs, valuing her practical perspective. One night, Mrs. Jenkins found them laughing over Chinese takeout as Damien told stories about his early days as an architect. My first project was a disaster, he admitted. The client wanted modern, but my idea of modern was something out of a science fiction movie. The look on his face when I showed him the design. What did you do? Jasmine asked, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. Started over. Learned to listen to what people actually needed, not just what I thought they should want. His smile faded slightly. Something my brother never understood about the Foundation's work. The mention of Richard brought reality crashing back. The board meeting was just days away, and tension filled the house. That Sunday, another complication arose. Malik's regular weekend with Miss Rodriguez was cancelled when the elderly woman caught a bad cold. I'm sorry, Mr. Wexler, Jasmine said, Malik standing nervously beside her. I know we need to finish the presentations, but I can't leave him alone. To her surprise, Damien didn't protest. He can help, he said simply. We need someone to organize. These sketches anyway. Malik's face lit up. Really, can I see the drawings? Something softened in Damien's expression. Come here, kid. Let me show you how to read a blueprint. The scene touched something deep in Jasmine's heart. Watching Damien patiently explain architectural terms to her son, seeing Malik's eyes shine with interest, she felt an emotion she wasn't ready to name. Later that evening, after Malik had fallen asleep on the study's couch, Damien caught Jasmine. Watching him, what? He asked. You're good with him, she said softly. Not many people would take the time. He's a good kid, smart too. Damien hesitated. His father, is he involved? Jasmine's smile faded. No, he left when I told him I was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready to be a father. His loss, Damien said quietly. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. The moment was broken by the sound of the front door opening. Richard's voice echoed through the hall. "Damien, we need to talk about the meeting." Jasmine quickly gathered the sleeping Malik in her arms. "I should go." "No," Damien said firmly. "Stay, please." Richard burst into the study, then stopped short at the scene before him. Jasmine with Malik, the room full of drawings, Damien at his drafting table. "What's all this?" Richard demanded. "This is me getting ready for the board meeting," Damien replied. "You wanted me involved? Well, I'm involved." Richard picked up one of the sketches. "New designs, Damien, the foundation doesn't need designs. We need leadership, fundraising. We need to remember our purpose," Damien cut in. "Grandfather didn't start this foundation to throw parties for rich donors. He started it to make a difference in people's lives. Times have changed. We need money to operate, and we'll get it, but not by abandoning our mission." Damien's voice grew stronger. "I'm coming to the board meeting, Richard, and I'm bringing a proposal for a new direction." Richard's face darkened. "You can't just walk back in after 2 years and take control. Watch me." The brothers stared each other down until Richard finally turned away. "Fine. Bring your proposals. But don't be surprised when the board doesn't share your idealistic views." After he left, Jasmine laid a still sleeping Malik back on the couch. "Are you okay?" Damien ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know. For 2 years, I've let him run everything his way. Maybe I waited too long to fight back." "It's never too late to fight for what you believe in." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his gaze made her heart skip. "Why do you have so much faith in me?" "Because I've seen who you really are, under all that anger and pain. The man who designs buildings that help people. The man who takes time to teach architecture to an 8-year-old boy. That's the real Damien Wexler." She turned away, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "I should get Malik home, Jasmine." His voice stopped her. When she looked back, his eyes were intense. "Thank you for not giving up on me." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Jasmine felt her cheeks flush. "Good night, Mr. Wexler." "Damien," he said softly. "Please call me Damien." That night, as Jasmine lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her, the way her heart had raced when he asked her to use his first name, the way everything was changing between them. But romance wasn't part of her plan. She had Malik to think about, and Damien had the foundation to fight for. She couldn't afford to let her heart lead her into dangerous territory. What she didn't know was that her heart had already made its choice, and the biggest challenges were still to come. The morning of the board meeting dawned bright and clear. Jasmine arrived early to help Damien prepare, finding him already dressed in a sharp suit, his wheelchair positioned by the window. "You didn't sleep," she said, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. "How could I?" His hands fidgeted with his tie. "Everything depends on today." Jasmine stepped forward, gently fixing his crooked tie. "Your designs are brilliant. The board will see that." Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Damien's hand caught hers, still resting on his tie. "Come with me today." "To the meeting, but you're the reason I'm even trying this. Please, Jasmine, I need you there." The vulnerability in his voice made her heart ache. "Okay. Let me call Ms. Rodriguez about Malik." Mrs. Jenkins appeared in the doorway. "The car is ready, Mr. Wexler." The Wexler Foundation headquarters occupied a sleek downtown building. As they pulled up, Jasmine saw Richard waiting at the entrance, his expression dark. "Remember why you're doing this," she whispered to Damien as they approached. The boardroom fell silent when Damien wheeled himself in. Most of the board members hadn't seen him since before the accident. Their shock was visible. "Welcome back." "Damien," Richard said smoothly, taking his place at the head of the table. "The board has been anxious to hear your input." Damien positioned himself at the opposite end. "Before we begin, I'd like to present something." He nodded to Jasmine, who began distributing folders containing his designs. The board members opened them, murmurs of surprise filling the room. "These are preliminary designs for a new type of community center," Damien began. one that truly serves all members of our community. As he explained his vision, Jasmine watched the faces around the table. Some showed genuine interest, others skepticism. Richard's expression grew darker with each word. "This is all very touching," Richard interrupted, "but the foundation can't afford to fund passion projects. Our focus needs to be on sustainable growth." "You mean on fancy fundraisers and photo ops?" Damien's voice cut through the room. "That's not what this foundation was built for. Times have changed, Damien. While you've been hiding in your mansion, I've been keeping this foundation alive by betraying everything it stands for." Damien's fist hit the table. "Show them, Jasmine." She pulled out more papers, financial reports they discovered while preparing for the meeting. "Under my brother's leadership," Damien continued, "administrative costs have tripled. Money meant for community programs has been diverted to consulting fees and executive expenses. Meanwhile, actual community support has dropped by 60%. The board members began examining the numbers, concerned whispers spreading around the table. Richard's face turned red. "You have no right to come in here and make accusations." "I have every right." Damien's voice rang with authority. "This is my grandfather's legacy. He built this foundation to help people, not to fund your lifestyle." An elderly board member spoke up. "These numbers are troubling, Richard, and Damien's designs. They remind me of the work his grandfather used to do." "We can't just throw away 2 years of progress," Richard argued. "The foundation needs stability." "The foundation needs its soul back," Damien countered. He wheeled himself around the table, showing more detailed drawings. "These centers wouldn't just be buildings. They'd be symbols of hope, places where everyone, regardless of ability or circumstances, can find help and purpose." Another board member leaned forward. "The accessibility features are remarkable. And the cost estimates seem reasonable. Because I know how to build efficiently," Damien said. "I may be in this chair, but my mind still works. My hands still work. And I'm ready to work for this foundation again, the right way." The room erupted in discussion. Richard tried to regain control, but the momentum had shifted. Finally, the elderly board member called for a vote. "All in favor of appointing Damien Wexler as co-director of the foundation, with full authority over project development?" Hands raised around the table. Richard watched in disbelief as his control slipped away. "This isn't over," he hissed at Damien as he stormed out. The victory should have felt complete, but something was wrong. As board members congratulated Damien, Jasmine noticed his face growing pale. "Damien," she touched his shoulder. "Are you okay?" I don't..." His words slurred, and suddenly his body went rigid. "He's having a seizure," Jasmine called out. "Someone call an ambulance." The next hours were a blur of hospital corridors and worried doctors. Jasmine paced the waiting room, her heart in her throat. "Miss Carter," a doctor emerged. "Mr. Wexler is asking for you." She found him in a hospital bed, looking exhausted but alert. "The doctor says it was stress and exhaustion," he said before she could ask. "I'll be fine." "You scared me." The words came out more emotional than she intended. "I scared myself." He reached for her hand. "But I couldn't have done any of this without you, Jasmine." The way he said her name made her pulse quicken. "I just helped with the presentations." "You did more than that. You made me believe in myself again." His fingers tightened around hers. "When I saw you standing up to Richard, fighting for my vision, I realized something." "What?" "That I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Jasmine's heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Damien, you don't have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know it's complicated. I'm your employer and there's Malik to think about. And your brother to deal with," she added softly. "Richard won't give up easily," Damien agreed. "The foundation battle isn't over." "One thing at a time," Jasmine said, squeezing his hand. "Right now you need to rest." But as she turned to leave, he called out, "Jasmine, will you be here tomorrow?" She looked back at him, seeing past the wheelchair, past the walls he'd built, to the man who had captured her heart despite all her careful plans. "Always," she whispered. That night, as she held Malik close and told him why she'd been late, she knew everything was about to change. Damien's confession had shifted the ground. Beneath her feet, And there was no going back. The question was, were they ready for what lay ahead? Because Richard's threat echoed in her mind, and she knew the real battle was just beginning. The next few weeks brought changes no one could have predicted. Damien threw himself into his new role at the foundation, working from home while recovering from his hospital stay. The study became command central, filled with blueprints, project proposals, and constant video calls. But Richard wasn't going down without a fight. "Another donor pulled out this morning," Mrs. Jenkins announced, bringing "in the morning coffee." "That's the third one this week." Damien's jaw tightened. Richard's been talking to them, telling them the foundation is unstable under my leadership. Jasmine, who was organizing project files, felt her anger rise. "He's trying to sabotage you." Of course he is. The question is, how far will he go? They got their answer that afternoon. Jasmine was helping Damien with his physical therapy when Mrs. Jenkins burst in, waving a newspaper. "You need to see this," she said, her face pale. The headline made Jasmine's blood run cold. "Wexler Foundation in Crisis. Sources question disabled director's competency." The article was brutal, filled with anonymous quotes questioning Damien's ability to lead while confined to a wheelchair and hinting at mental instability. Worst of all, it mentioned his recent hospitalization, twisting it into evidence of his unfitness. "Richard," Damien growled, "this has his fingerprints all over." "But why would he hurt the foundation just to get back at you?" Jasmine asked. "Because he knows donors will still trust him to save it once I'm forced out. He's playing the long game." The phone started ringing non-stop. Board members wanted emergency meetings. Donors demanded explanations. Through it all, Damien remained surprisingly calm. "We expected this," he told Jasmine that evening as they reviewed damage control strategies. "Richard's always been good at manipulation, but we have to fight back. We will. But smartly." He wheeled himself to the window, thinking, "The article mentions my confined state as a weakness. Let's turn it into a strength." The next day, Damien called a press conference. Despite Jasmine's concerns about his health, he insisted on doing it in person at the foundation headquarters. Reporters packed the room, cameras flashing as Damien took his position at the podium. Jasmine stood nearby, ready to help if needed. "I've read the recent articles questioning my ability to lead this foundation," Damien began. "And I agree, my disability is relevant to my leadership, but not in the way you might think," he gestured to the presentation screen behind him, where his designs appeared. "These are plans for our next project, a state-of-the-art community center designed specifically to be accessible to everyone. I drew these designs myself, using my personal experience to create spaces that truly work for people with disabilities." The reporters leaned forward, interested despite themselves. "My wheelchair isn't a limitation. It's given me insight no able-bodied architect could have. Every ramp, every doorway, every detail is designed with real understanding of what people need." As he spoke, Jasmine watched the room change. The skepticism turned to attention, then interest, then genuine enthusiasm. But in the back of the room, she noticed a familiar face. Richard stood in the shadows, talking quietly on his phone. Damien was just finishing his presentation when Jasmine's own phone buzzed. The message made her gasp. "What is it?" Damien asked as they left the podium. "Ms. Rodriguez just texted. Someone came to her apartment asking questions about me and Malik, about our background, our relationship with you." Damien's face darkened. "Richard's digging for dirt." "But why?" "I'm just your caregiver." "Are you?" His voice softened. "Is that all you are to me?" Their eyes met, and all the unspoken feelings of the past weeks hung between them. Since his confession in the hospital, they'd been dancing around their emotions, both afraid to take the next step. "Damien," she started, but was interrupted by his brother's approach. "Quite a performance," Richard said smoothly. "But we both. I know it won't save you." "What do you want, Richard?" "The same thing I've always wanted. What's best for the foundation. Step down quietly and all this goes away." "And if I don't?" Richard's eyes slid to Jasmine. "Then I start asking questions about your interesting relationship with your caregiver, about her convenient presence during your miraculous recovery, about her access to the Foundation's confidential information." "Leave her out of this," Damien growled. Why? Is there something to hide? Before anyone could respond, a small voice called out, "Mom!" Malik ran across the lobby, followed by an apologetic Ms. Rodriguez. "I'm sorry, he insisted on coming to see the buildings Mr. Damien designed." Richard's eyebrows rose. Well, the plot thickens. That's enough." Damien's voice cut through the tension. "Your battle is with me, Richard. Come after my family again, and you'll regret it." The word family made both Jasmine and Richard freeze. "Family?" Richard laughed coldly. "Is that what you think they are? Wake up, brother. She's an employee who saw an opportunity, and you were fool enough to fall for it." "Get out," Damien said, his voice deadly quiet. "Get out before I forget. You're my brother." After Richard left, Jasmine knelt beside Damien's wheelchair. "He's going to keep coming after us." "I know." Damien reached for her hand. Maybe you should take some time away. Keep you and Malik safe until this blows over." "Is that what you want?" "You know it's not." His fingers tightened around hers. "But I can't bear the thought of either of you getting hurt because of me." Malik, who had been watching them with curious eyes, suddenly spoke up. "Mom says running away doesn't solve problems. It just makes them bigger." Jasmine and Damien both turned to look at the boy, surprised by his wisdom. "When did you get so smart?" Jasmine asked, pulling him close. "Mr. Damien taught me. He says good design means facing problems and fixing them, not hiding them." Damien's eyes filled with emotion. "Out of the mouths of babes, so we stay and fight?" Jasmine asked softly. "We stay and fight," Damien confirmed, "together." But as they left the foundation building that evening, none of them noticed the private investigator Richard had hired, quietly taking photos from across the street. The battle for the foundation and their hearts was about to take a dangerous turn. The morning headlines hit like a Famity Wexler Foundation scandal. Director's intimate relationship with employee raises questions. Jasmine's hands shook as she read the article. Somehow Richard's private investigator had gotten photos of every tender moment between her and Damien. Their hands touching during physical therapy, their close conversations in the study, even Malik hugging Damien after the press conference. "It's my fault," she whispered, standing in Damien's study. "I should have been more careful." "No," Damien's voice was firm. "Richard did this, not you." But the damage was spreading. Social media was buzzing with speculation. Was the formerly brilliant architect being manipulated by his caregiver? Was his recent recovery a scheme to gain control of the foundation? The phone rang, another board member demanding answers. "Mr. Wexler," Mrs. Jenkins appeared in the doorway. "Channel 5 News is outside the gate. They're requesting an interview." Damien wheeled himself to the window. A crowd of reporters had gathered, cameras pointed at the mansion. "We need to make a statement," he said finally. "Get ahead of this." Damien, "No." Jasmine stepped forward. "I should resign. Give Richard what he wants." "Never." He caught her hand. "I won't let him win by hurting the people I love." The word love hung in the air between them. Before either could speak, Malik burst into the study. "Mom." Kids at school were asking weird questions. "They said their parents saw us on TV." Jasmine's heart broke. Now her son was being dragged into this mess. "Come here, buddy," Damien called softly. When Malik approached his wheelchair, Damien looked him in the eye. "Some people are trying to cause trouble for your mum and me, but we're not going to let them win. You know why?" Malik shook his head. "Because we're stronger together than they are alone." The boy's face brightened. "Like your buildings. You said they're stronger when all the parts work together." "Exactly." Damien smiled, then looked at Jasmine. "Which is why we're going to fight this as a family." Before she could respond, Mrs. Jenkins rushed back in. "Mr. Wexler, you need to see this. Richard is giving a live interview on Channel 5. They turned on the television to see Richard standing outside the foundation building, looking appropriately concerned. "Of course I care deeply about my brother," he was saying. "But the foundation's integrity must come first. These allegations of an inappropriate relationship with an employee, possibly influencing foundation decisions, that's not true," Malik shouted at the TV. "We know, sweetheart," Jasmine soothed him, but inside she was terrified. Richard was painting her as a gold digger, using her position to manipulate Damien. Enough. Damien's voice cut through her fears. "Mrs. Jenkins, call the station. Tell them I'm ready to give my own interview, but I want Angela Chen. She's known our family for years." "Damien, are you sure?" Jasmine asked. "Absolutely. But first..." He wheeled himself to his desk and pulled out a small box. "I need to do something I should have done weeks ago." Jasmine's heart stopped as he opened the box, revealing a stunning vintage ring. "This was my grandmother's," he said softly. "She gave it to me before she died, told me to save it for someone who saw me. Not my wealth or position, but me." "Damien, I love you, Jasmine. I love your strength, your compassion, your unwavering faith in me. I love how you've brought light back into my life. And I love Malik like he was my own." Tears filled Jasmine's eyes as Damien continued. "I know the timing is terrible. I know Richard will try to use this against us. But I don't care anymore. I want to build a life with you and Malik. Will you marry me?" The room fell silent. Even. Malik held his breath. Through her tears, Jasmine smiled. Yes, yes to all of it. As Damien slipped the ring onto her finger, Malik cheered and Mrs. Jenkins dabbed at her eyes with her apron. But their joy was interrupted by the office phone ringing. It was Theodore Wallace, the eldest board member. "Damien," the old man's voice was grave. "The board is calling an emergency meeting. Richard is demanding a vote of no confidence." After he hung up, Damien looked at his new fiancée. "The real fight starts now. Are you ready?" Jasmine squeezed his hand, her grandmother's ring catching the light. Together, remember? They spent the next hours preparing. Damien gathered financial records showing Richard's mismanagement. Jasmine compiled a timeline of her employment and their relationship. Mrs. Jenkins called longtime staff members who could vouch for both of them. As evening fell, Angela Chen from Channel 5 arrived for the interview. She set up in the study, now cleared of confidential documents. "We'll live in 3, 2, 1. "Thank you for having me, Angela," Damien began. "I'd like to address the rumors about my relationship with Jasmine Carter." He spoke from the heart, describing how Jasmine had helped him recover, not just physically, but emotionally. How she'd encouraged him to return to architecture and the foundation. How she and Malik had brought joy back into his life. "Yes, I love her," he said directly to the camera. "And yes, I've asked her to marry me. But anyone who suggests she's manipulating me doesn't know either of us. She's the one who pushed me to face my responsibilities, to fight for my grandfather's legacy." "And what about the foundation's future?" Angela asked. "Tomorrow, the board will vote on my leadership. They'll have to choose between my brother's vision of exclusive fundraisers and social events, or my plan to return to our original mission, helping communities in need. And if they vote against you," Damien's face set with determination, "then I'll start over, build something new, because Jasmine taught me that true strength isn't in standing alone, it's in standing together." After the interview, Jasmine held him close. "That was beautiful. I meant every word." He kissed her hand, then looked at Malik, who had fallen asleep on the study couch. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we'll face it as a family." But as they prepared for bed that night, a text arrived from Theodore Wallace. "Richard's been busy. He has proxy votes from 3 board members who couldn't attend. The numbers don't look good." Jasmine saw the worry in Damien's eyes, but his voice remained steady. "Then we'll just have to change their minds." Neither of them slept much that night, both knowing that tomorrow would determine not just their future, but the fate of everything Damien's grandfather had built. What they didn't know was that Richard had one more card to play, one that would force them to choose between their love and the foundation's survival. The morning of the board meeting dawned grey and stormy, matching the tension in the Wexler mansion. Jasmine helped Damien dress, her grandmother's ring catching the light as she adjusted his tie. "Whatever happens today," she said softly, "we're in this together." They were about to leave when Mrs. Jenkins rushed in, her face pale. "Richard's here. He says he needs to speak with both of you, alone." Damien and Jasmine exchanged worried looks. "Show him in," Damien said finally. Richard entered the study, impeccably dressed as always, but something about his expression made Jasmine's blood run cold. "I'm giving you one last chance," he said without preamble, placing a folder on Damien's desk. "Both of you." Inside were documents, old medical records, court papers, and newspaper clippings that made Jasmine's heart stop. "Where did you get these?" she whispered. "I have very thorough investigators." Richard's smile was cold. "Imagine the headlines: Wexler Foundation caregiver hides criminal past. Your ex-boyfriend's assault charges, the restraining order, the fact that you moved across the country to escape him. That was years ago." Jasmine's voice shook. "I was protecting my son. The press won't care about context. They'll just see that you lied on your employment application by omitting your legal history." Damien's hands gripped his wheelchair arms. "You're despicable, Richard. I'm practical. Here's the deal. Jasmine resigns immediately, publicly stating she took advantage of your vulnerable state. She leaves town with her son. In exchange, these records stay buried, and I convince the board to let you stay on as a figurehead. Everyone wins." "Everyone except justice," Damien snapped. "Everyone except the people who need this foundation. Don't be naive, brother. The foundation will survive under my leadership. But if these documents come out, the scandal will destroy everything, including your precious community projects." Jasmine felt the world spinning. Everything she'd built, everything she and Damien had planned, was crumbling. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "Jasmine." "Oh," Damien reached for her hand. "I have to protect Malik." Tears filled her eyes. "I can't let him go through another scandal, another move, another school." "Smart girl," Richard smiled. "I have a statement prepared." "Wait," Damien's voice cut through the room. "There's another option." He wheeled himself to his desk and pulled out a different folder. "Your own secrets, Richard. The real reason you're so desperate to keep control." Richard's smile faded. "What are you talking about? The missing donor funds, the offshore accounts. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate? I just didn't want to use it because, despite everything, you're my brother." The color drained from Richard's face. "You're bluffing. Call Theodore Wallace. Ask him what the forensic accountants found when they started looking into your executive expenses." The brothers stared at each other, years of rivalry and resentment hanging between them. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice tight. "You'd really destroy your own brother? You stopped being my brother the moment you threatened my family." Damien's voice was steel. "Now get out. The board meeting starts in an hour." After Richard left, Jasmine collapsed into a chair. "Why didn't you tell me about the investigation? I was hoping I wouldn't need it, hoping some part of the brother I grew up with was still in there." Damien took her hand. "I'm sorry about your past coming up like this. I should have told you. You did nothing wrong. You protected your son. That's one of the reasons I love you." Her eyes filled with fresh tears. "I was so scared when he showed those papers." "I know, but we're stronger than his threats." Damien squeezed her hand. "Now let's go save my grandfather's legacy. The right way." The foundation boardroom was packed when they arrived. Richard sat at one end of the table, looking confident despite their earlier confrontation. Theodore Wallace called the meeting to order. "We're here to vote on the future leadership of the Wexler Foundation." Richard has moved for a vote of no confidence in Damien's leadership, citing recent personal complications. "Before we vote," Damien spoke up, "I'd like to address the board one last time." He wheeled himself to the front of the room, Jasmine standing proudly beside him. "My grandfather built this foundation on a simple idea that everyone deserves a chance to build a better life. He didn't care about social status or past mistakes. He cared about the future we could create together." He gestured to the designs displayed on the wall. "These centers aren't just buildings, they're second chances. Places where people can rebuild their lives, just like I've rebuilt mine." His eyes found Richard's. "Yes, I fell in love with my caregiver. Yes, she has a past she's not proud of. But who among us doesn't? The question isn't where we've been, it's where we're going." Pulling out a folder, he continued, "And speaking of where things have gone, Mr. Wallace, would you share what the Foundation's auditors have discovered?" Theodore stood up, holding his own papers. "We've found significant financial irregularities under Richard's leadership." Misappropriated funds, hidden accounts, the boardroom erupted in chaos. Richard jumped to his feet, but Theodore's voice cut through the noise. The police have already been notified. They're waiting outside. As security escorted a protesting Richard from the room, Damien turned back to the board. I'm not asking you to ignore the past. I'm asking you to focus on the future my grandfather dreamed of, the future Jasmine helped me believe in again. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Later that evening, as they watched the sunset from Damien's study, Jasmine asked, "Do you think Richard will ever forgive you? Maybe someday, when he realizes I did it to save him as much as the foundation." Damien pulled her into his lap. "Right now, I'm more interested in our future." "Our future," she repeated softly, looking at her ring. "It sounds wonderful." But as they held each other, neither could have guessed that their greatest challenge was still to come, one that would test not just their love, but their very survival. 3 months after Richard's arrest, life at the Wexler mansion had settled into a happy routine. Wedding plans were underway, Malik had his own room decorated with architectural drawings, and Damien's first community center was nearly ready for its grand opening. "The ramps are perfect," Damien said, reviewing the final construction photos. "Every detail exactly as we designed it." Jasmine smiled, watching him work. The bitter man who had first hired her was gone, replaced by someone full of purpose and but their peace was about to be shattered. It started with a letter, no return address, just a single sheet of paper that made Jasmine's hands shake when she opened it. "I found you." She recognized the handwriting immediately. Marcus, Malik's father, the man she'd spent years hiding from. "Mom?" Malik called from the doorway. "Are you okay? You look scared." Jasmine quickly crumpled the letter. "I'm fine, baby. Just tired. Why don't you go help Mrs. Jenkins with dinner?" But that night she couldn't sleep. The past she'd thought was safely buried was clawing its way back to the surface. "What's wrong?" Damien asked, noticing her distraction during their morning routine. "You've been quiet since yesterday." "It's nothing," she tried to smile, "just wedding jitters." He wasn't fooled. "Jasmine, we promised no more secrets." Before she could respond, Mrs. Jenkins burst in. "Mr. Wexler, there's a man at the gate. He's demanding to see Jasmine, says he's Malik's father." The color drained from Jasmine's face. "No. Call security," Damien ordered. "Don't let him in." "But..." Marcus's voice carried through the open window, getting louder and more aggressive. "You can't keep my son from me. I have rights." Malik appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide with fear. "Mom, is that him?" "Go to your room, sweetheart," Jasmine said quickly. "Lock the door." But now, Malik." As the boy ran upstairs, the sound of breaking glass echoed from the front of the house. "He's gotten past the gate," Mrs. Jenkins reported, her face pale. "Security is calling the police, but..." Another crash, closer this time. Marcus had broken. Get behind me," Damien said to Jasmine, positioning his wheelchair between her and the door. "Damien, no, you don't know what he's capable of." "Neither does he." Damien's voice was steel. The study door burst open. Marcus stood there, older than Jasmine remembered, but with the same dangerous light in his eyes. "Well, well," he sneered. "Living in luxury now, aren't you? While keeping my son from me?" "You lost any right to Malik when you put me in the hospital," Jasmine said, her voice shaking but firm. "That was an accident." Marcus took a step forward. "You're the one who ran away, who turned my own son against me." "Step back," Damien warned. "The police are on their way." Marcus laughed bitterly. "And who's this? Your meal ticket? A crippled millionaire who fell for your innocent act?" I said, "Step back." Damien's voice never wavered. "Or what? You'll run me over with your wheelchair." Everything happened in seconds. Marcus lunged forward. Damien spun his chair, using the momentum to block him. But Marcus was stronger, shoving the wheelchair aside. Jasmine screamed as Damien hit the ground hard. She grabbed a heavy paperweight from the desk, but Marcus was faster, catching her wrist. "You're coming with me," he growled. "You and my son. We're going to be a family again, whether you like it or not." "No, they're not." The voice came from behind them. Theodore Wallace stood in the doorway, a security guard beside him. He held something in his hand. Richard's old gun from the foundation safe. "Let her go," Theodore said calmly. "Now." Marcus's grip tightened. "This isn't your business, old man. The Wexlers have been my business for 40 years. I watched Damien grow up. I won't let you hurt his family." The security guard moved forward, but Marcus yanked Jasmine in front of him like a shield. "Back off or she gets hurt." "Mom?" Everyone froze. Malik stood on the study's upper level, looking down through the railing. "Malik, run!" Jasmine cried, but seeing his son seemed to break something in Marcus. His grip loosened just enough. Jasmine drove her elbow back, just as Damien had taught her in their self-defense lessons. At the same moment, the security guard tackled Marcus from behind. The police arrived minutes later, taking Marcus away in handcuffs. As paramedics checked Damien for injuries from his fall, Malik clung to his mother. "I was so scared," he whispered. "It's over now," she soothed him. "He'll never hurt us again." Theodore came to check on them, the gun safely locked away. "I came by to discuss the center's opening ceremony. Good thing I still had the Foundation's security codes." "Thank you," Damien said, wincing as he was helped back into his wheelchair. "But how did you know about the gun?" "Richard kept it in his desk, said it was for protection." Theodore shook his head. "Never thought I'd need to use it." Later that night, after Malik was finally asleep, Jasmine found Damien in their bedroom, his back bruised but nothing broken. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I should have told you about the letter." "Shh." He pulled her close. "No more apologies. No more fear. When he pushed your chair, I thought, I know, but I'd do it again. You and Malik are my family now. Nothing will change that." Jasmine touched his face, seeing the love and strength that had drawn her to him from the beginning. "How did I get so lucky?" she wondered aloud. "I'm the lucky one," he smiled. "Now let's focus on tomorrow. We have a community center to open, remember?" But as they held each other, both knew that Marcus's appearance had changed everything. The past wasn't finished with them yet, because, in his rage at being arrested, Marcus had made a phone call to Richard. And in prison, Richard had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity, to destroy his brother's happiness once and for all. The morning of the community center's grand opening dawned bright and clear. Television crews set up their equipment, while workers made final preparations for the ceremony. "Everything looks perfect," Jasmine said, adjusting Damien's tie as they prepared to leave the mansion. "Almost perfect," he smiled, pulling out a small box. "One thing missing. Inside was a delicate gold chain with a heart-shaped pendant. Early wedding present," he explained, fastening it around her neck, "for the woman who gave me back my heart." The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Jenkins rushing in. "Turn on the news, now." On every channel the story was breaking. Wexler Foundation scandal deepens. Shocking new evidence emerges. Richard's face filled the screen, speaking from prison in an exclusive interview. "I was trying to protect my brother," he said, looking appropriately concerned. "When I discovered Ms. Carter's connection to Marcus Peterson, a known criminal, I feared she was part of a plot to take control of the Foundation." The report cut to police records, restraining orders, and hospital reports. All the documents Richard had threatened them with before. "But that's not the worst part," Richard continued. "New evidence suggests Ms. Carter and Mr. Peterson planned this from the beginning. Their violent confrontation at the mansion was staged to gain sympathy, to cement her position in my brother's life." "He's lying," Jasmine cried. "That's not all," Mrs. Jenkins said quietly. "Look, security camera footage from the prison showed Marcus visiting Richard multiple times before his attack at the mansion. The reporters were spinning it as proof of their collaboration." Damien's phone started ringing. Board members, donors, reporters, all demanding answers. "We have to cancel the opening," Theodore Wallace said when he arrived. "The press is having a field day." "No." Damien's voice was firm. "We're doing this today." "Damien," Jasmine touched his arm. "Maybe I should stay away. Let you handle this without what? Without the woman I love, without my family." He took her hand. "We've tried hiding before, not anymore." When they arrived at the center, the crowd was massive. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and in the middle of it all stood Marcus's lawyer holding a press conference. My client was trying to protect his son, the lawyer was saying, from a woman who has shown a pattern of deception. That's enough. Damien's voice cut through the chaos as he wheeled himself to the podium. The crowd fell silent. You all want a story? Here's your story. 2 years ago, I was a bitter man hiding from life. Then I met a woman who saw past my wheelchair, past my walls, to the person I could still be. She taught me that disability doesn't define you, that love is stronger than fear. He gestured to the building behind him. This center exists because of Jasmine. She inspired me to start designing again, to remember why I became an architect in the first place, to help people build better lives. But the evidence? A reporter started. The evidence shows a mother protecting her child from abuse. It shows a woman rebuilding her life despite every obstacle. And yes, it shows my brother conspiring with her abuser to destroy her reputation. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Damien continued. We have proof. Prison visitor logs, recorded conversations, money transfers from Richard's hidden accounts to Marcus Peterson. All of it has been turned over to the district attorney. Theodore stepped forward, holding up documents. The Foundation's lawyers have thoroughly investigated every claim. Ms. Carter has been completely cleared of any wrongdoing, but Damien wasn't finished. This center represents second chances, new beginnings. It's designed for people who need help rebuilding their lives. People like me, people like Jasmine, people like everyone who's ever faced darkness and chose to fight for light. He reached for Jasmine's hand. So yes, I'm in love with my former caregiver. Yes, we're getting married. And yes, we're adopting her son legally as soon as the paperwork clears. Malik, who had been standing quietly with Mrs. Jenkins, ran to join them at the podium. Damien lifted him onto his lap. This is my family, Damien declared, and this center is our gift to every family that needs a fresh start. Now, who's ready to cut this ribbon? The crowd erupted in cheers. As Malik helped Damien and Jasmine cut the ribbon together, cameras flashed, but this time capturing images of love, not scandal. Later that evening, as they watched the sunset from the center's rooftop garden, Jasmine asked, "Did you mean it about adopting Malik?" "Of course," Damien smiled. "I had the papers drawn up weeks ago. Was waiting for the right moment to ask you both." "Ask me what?" Malik piped up from where he was arranging small potted plants. "How would you like to make it official?" Damien asked. "Being my son." Malik's face lit up. "Really? Like, for real?" "For real." The boy threw himself into Damien's arms. "Yes, can I call you Dad?" "I'd love that." Jasmine wiped tears from her eyes as she watched them, remembering the first day she'd walked into the mansion. How far they'd all come. "Look," Malik pointed to the sky. "The first star." Above them, the evening star shone bright against the darkening sky. Damien pulled Jasmine onto his lap, joining Malik. "Make a wish," he whispered. "Don't need to," she replied, touching her heart-shaped pendant. "I have everything I ever wished for right here." As the city lights began to twinkle below them, 3 hearts beat as one. The bitter man in the wheelchair had found his heart. The single mother had found her strength, and a little boy had found the family he'd always dreamed of. In the end, love had built something stronger than any foundation, any building, any fear. It had built a home. 6 months later, as Jasmine walked down the aisle in the center's garden, her white dress trailing over the ramps Damien had designed, she saw the future in his eyes. Richard, serving his sentence for conspiracy and fraud, was a distant memory. Marcus had accepted a plea deal and moved across the country, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the man waiting for her, the boy standing proudly beside him, and the love that had given them all a second chance. "Ready?" Damien asked as she reached him. Jasmine looked at her soon-to-be husband, at their son, at the life they'd built together. "Ready," she smiled, "for everything." And as they joined hands, the evening star appeared again, blessing a love that had overcome every obstacle, healed every wound, and built a future brighter than any of them had dared to dream. The end.